Right, so let's dive straight in. When we talk about cross-border payments, we talk about digital public infrastructure, we often talk about code. You know, digital public infrastructure hasn't become what it is. It has not become successful because of code or technology. It's become what it is because it's solving a great problem every day for many, many people. And therefore, this whole story of DPI is no longer local or national. It is really a global story. And that's what we're here to discuss, whether it's cross-border payments, remittances, digital identity, trade, capital. All of these are actually in the current form stopping at national boundaries, but they need to be globally accessible. And that's what we're here to talk about through the digital public infrastructure. We have a great panel with us. We're going to have a conversation around interoperability. So I'm going to start with a very broad question, and I want to welcome our panelists who are online. Vijay, can you hear us? Now I think you can. Dilip, you can hear us. Awesome, great. So let's start with a very broad question. What is DPI? What are we really solving for? Are we solving for speed, inclusion, trust, power? What's the focus here, and how is it going to make the world a better place? So I'm going to throw it open. Maybe Siddharth, you're on my left, so I'm going to start with you, then we'll go over to Delhi, and then we'll come back to you.
Sure. Thank you, Priyank, and thank you to CIEP and IBPC for inviting me and giving me this chance. Really, the way I look at digital public infrastructure, if you break down those three letters, DPI, D is these are fundamentally digital interventions into an economy. It doesn't necessarily mean individuals or businesses need to have a smartphone, as we've seen through Aadhaar and other payment systems. You could have feature phones, you could have no phones, but these are fundamentally digital interventions at population scale. The P in public infrastructure, in my view, means these are designed in public interest. And so they really bring the best of both worlds, public sector and public authorities, along with private innovation to the table, which are a whole range of entrepreneurs going out, raising capital and building out those markets. And the I is really taking an infrastructure approach. As we saw in India, just given the sheer diversity of solving for 1.4 billion people, there's no one app or one solution that's going to solve for it. And so you really need to think of this, much like the physical highways, you need to think about similar such highways when you're building digital ecosystems. And so I think that's where the journey of Aadhaar, UPI, some of the largest identity payment systems, data sharing systems come in. And more recently, with the G20 efforts that span through Brazil and South Africa, we've gone on to see DPI also become a broader global movement.
Dilip, would you like to share a perspective here? You've been at the helm of doing a lot of work in creating this infrastructure, and also very openly talked about interoperability. So,
thank you. I hope the questions for me, right?
Yes, of course, for everyone, but yeah.
First of all, sorry, I could not be there in person, so I apologize to all the audience. And I think, while Siddharth has spoken about it, let me just add my figure that I think the DPI believes that every country must have its, and the characteristics of the DPI could be very, very different for each country. If I would just simply say that every country must ensure that it has the control on its digital payment system because the digital payment systems are critical for the well-being of the country, the well-being of the citizens of the country, the access, financial inclusion, and variety of tools can attach to that. And the country need not depend on any other country to process its domestic payment. I think that's it's like, why the country, for the country, kind of a model which I believe the DPI articulates for that particular country. India has been fortunate to have the banks, the fintechs, and Vijay is there. Vijay has been Paytm has been a pioneer in the building of the DPI from all perspectives. So I think what we are saying in very simple terms, every country must have its own DPI for the digital payments processing without relying on any other country in today's world, right? Because in today's geopolitical situation, geopolitical dynamics, it is getting clearer and clearer, irrespective of the size of the country, irrespective of the wealth or whether its status, whether developing, emerging, whatever we talk about, every country sooner or later must have its own digital payment systems which are run in the benefit of the citizens, merchants, and the banks fintech ecosystem of that country. Right? That's my definition of DPI.
Thank you. Vijay, do you want to share your perspective here? You were the pioneer in introducing this to India.
Well, thank you so much. And just like Dilip, I'm sorry everybody, good to see you, good morning. And I'm happy that I'm able to join using Zoom here. And my understanding, very similar to Dilip Rogi and Siddharth said correctly, that DPI is a method that countries do not end up creating, let's say, a structure which is not very, let's say, depending on the long term or the block price of the technology over the. So if you equivalently go to look at it, operating systems are more or less owned by individual companies, and then internet, which is very open, has done its duty of working together with those companies. At the same time, the very vibrant nature of open infrastructure of internet has given it the joy that we see that we all consume of it. Similarly, in the financial world, the infrastructure that can be made available to everybody, equally available to everyone, without any distinction, without any limitation or commercial, lacking limitation or commercial limit that specifically private organization to put. So, public infrastructure is the next stage after PSU, I would say. So, these are very, very much high-tech companies, high-tech infrastructure, capable of being able to take care of order of magnitude population scale technologies for financial inclusion, for fostering innovation, and as a byproduct, increases resilience of the country and empowers different companies and individuals. The success is very visible. The capabilities of companies like us depend on this successful infrastructure creation and value creation at the back. Because it grows, the rest of the organizations and participating also expand on it and so on and so forth. Lately, as you've seen, obviously, we all talk about the classic success of Aadhaar, UPI, and government accounts and so on. But now we look at the next level, the account category development, the ULI, the credit innovations that are coming up, and then next financial systems that are to show up on top of it. So I think the success of DPI is now in India in the second phase, where the foundation has been built and the success has been acknowledged, and they've been building up new features and capabilities, and it has also shown how it coexists with everybody else in the ecosystem, and why does it not require module systems in the different places that typically put up this statement. I'm very happy and proud that we are a participant and contributor towards the DPI infrastructure in growth, and this financial inclusion could not be possible if we didn't have companies like NPCI and many other partners like UIDI in the ecosystem of the country.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vijay. When you move to the banker in the house, what's the banker's perspective to this? Is this whole thing about inclusion, interoperability, digital rails, is this a banker's nightmare, or is it something that banks can really scale up and benefit from?
From a banker's perspective, I don't look at it only as a payment systems. It's a human engine. DPIs today is a great enabler for humanity, from fragmented markets to interoperable markets, from a trade partnership to trust partnership. From energy partnership is evolving, energy dependency to energy partnership, from expatriate labor to talent management, and the kind of identity, globalizing the individual to institutions, having access for foreign markets, which will be the size of the institutions you have, globalizing it in substance, that gives you enormous amount of dignity to a business like human. And the challenge also there, in terms of digital architecture, India is the only country today created an open architecture. Open, democratic in substance, it's transportable. Now, the danger here when you globalize, you have access. There are big dominant players transcending borders. They are selling in billions. Trillions are being committed by sovereignties. And really, we have to be mindful of the fact you have access, but you don't have the control of your data. You are not destined to manage it and equate it with a common man. So the financial inclusion is the soul of the entire entrepreneurship. So you have to have global governance comes in, not by default, by design. We have to bring in ethical and moral governance for DPI. And that's the need of the hour. We are scaling sporadically. It's a tool. It doesn't have emotions, but it can be dangerous if you are not moderating it and making sure this is productive in every trade or investments, banking or finance, every area, as long as you have ethical and moral governance framed up in total democratization. Individuals should be empowered, and also ensuring a global agenda for sustainable value creations. And that's the need of the hour. It has got wider implications on economic governance, again, social governance, environmental governance more than anything else. We are seeing the reflection of DPI adding value for climate tech. And also, it's all human-centric, end of the day. Our job is to make sure human dignity is empowered and individuals become institutions.
So that's an interesting take. And how do we translate that into innovation? And Siddharth, this is where I want you to come in and talk a little bit about Finternet, talk about how it rides as a layer on top of what UPI is already doing and what it means for the next generation, because Vijay sort of touched upon it briefly, but if you can run us through that a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. So, yeah, absolutely. So we spent the last now 15 years designing and building digital public infrastructure, and myself along two of my colleagues, Nandan Nilikani and Pramod Verma, what we started to ask ourselves was, essentially, if you look at how infrastructure is designed today, it's still very purpose specific. So it's specific to a sector, right? Let's say, if you ask, and I'll be slightly provocative, UPI as a protocol allows you to transfer value from one store to another. Today, it's primarily implemented on monetary settlement rails, but why can't I use that to then transact, let's say, in the capital markets? Today, that requires complex bilateral integrations. And so let's say tomorrow I want to extend that to physical property. You'd expect each registrar to go ahead and implement new types of infrastructure, or data, you have to build a parallel network, or cross-border, and then that takes 4 to 5 years. And so what we realized is essentially the way infrastructure is built around the world is very specific to a sector, specific to a jurisdiction. Because essentially, if you think about it, over the last few decades, when we digitized the financial system, your stores of record or your systems of record got really fragmented, right? So let's take a very simple example. In the old world, let's say I gave you a US dollar, and you had that physical note, you had that physical token, and you could look at it, you could see all value embedded in it. You could give it to someone else at 2 in the morning, it worked. But when we digitized it, now imagine that same transaction. You have to go through a complex bilateral correspondent banking chain for what I could have just handed over to you. But if you look at the new developments around tokenization, which is hitting the financial system around the world, so you would have seen some of the largest asset managers making announcements. The US is moving very actively on tokenizing their monetary rails as well as capital markets. It's really moving in a direction where individuals and businesses can have digital control over any type of asset. Now, obviously, money is governed very differently than securities. It's governed very differently from other types of assets. And so you will have different issuers putting in place their rules. But we really move into a paradigm where, as an individual, I will have control over my digital IDs, digital credentials, which are beyond just my identity. It's about where I've worked, where I've studied, other proofs, other digital proofs, and I'll have control over my assets. And what that will really unlock is two critical use cases. One is the use case of verifiability. So if you imagine any financial transaction, you want to verify who is the issuer, who is the counterparty, how do you check for authenticity? So that is one. And second is the property of transactability, which is the ability to transfer. And so we're moving into a world where now ledgers can be in the control of a user, and tokenization facilitates that. And that's going to unlock a lot of both domestic innovation, because, for example, you have 100 countries that have a population less than 10 million. They struggle to build domestic infrastructure from scratch. They do care about digital and monetary sovereignty, but they struggle to build it from scratch, which is what these rails allow you to do. So you'll see a much larger leapfrog, essentially what DPI enabled. And one way I've been thinking about it is from DPI to UDI, which is Universal Digital Infrastructure, and what that enables. So those are some of the points, I think, both domestically, but also cross-border, where you can now have trade credit, you can have trade insurance, you can have cross-border payments getting implemented extremely easily across jurisdictions.
Thank you, Siddharth. That's very interesting. What I want to bring about here is this conversation, Vijay, from a founder's perspective, because Siddharth's talked about a lot of interesting models of how we can take this innovation to the next level. What will it take for a founder or a founder network to actually start working on this actively? How do we create a larger ecosystem? From a policy perspective, what changes do we bring about? And really, we are talking about India, UAE, India, West Asia partnership. So unless this is a global ecosystem that we're talking about creating, or at least a regional ecosystem we're talking about creating, we won't get the momentum. So share with us a founder's perspective on this. Sorry, Vijay, you're on mute. Yeah, you're on mute, Vijay.
It is one of those things that it is an infrastructure. So people have to build it on top of it. And like you talk about a server, talk about brand, we talk about, let's say, from a young tech perspective, and then it comes to an exchange of the infrastructure. These three stages that are talked. So, first and foremost, the infrastructure has a very advantage that it is for various other, depending on that it will become costly over the year. It is a very important thing to understand. That if the cost of the system over the year starts to increase, once you start to build on top of it, if you notice people who build, let's say, on social media platforms. So now the government platforms will take a decision that they are over 50 times. Or let's say any infrastructure that you build on, which is a commercial infrastructure. I mean, I don't take example of some services and infrastructure that are there. Where you have always lots of restriction limitation on the foundation platform. Usually, you know, app stores across the world have gone through antitrust checks, etc. One good thing about DPI is you're always sure that it is not going to be access. It's a fundamentally infrastructure provided as a public good. The very fact that it is made to public good invites that trust and confidence that you build on it, and you will say you will be proud of what you find. It won't be a limitation on everything and this is out. Okay? So one. So as a founder, that is something that you want to ensure. Translating a company on top of something that is long-term and stable, and will be there and not feel need or expect more commercial output than the adequate value. I think you have to do. Number one. Number two, it is equally important to talk about the interoperability and talk about scalability across all participating users. If you are an individual commercial company, it is always tough for you to go to different ecosystem players and different partners or participants in the business model. While the DPI infrastructure, because it is only sort of major community, many other participants who may be aware of or limited themselves of the I don't know with a partner or I do not partner. I do not partner with somebody. I do not do it. Those things also become very limited in a way. Because the entity that is operating infrastructure continuously listens to multiple party stakeholders and solve for their issues and concerns. For example, let's say you have an activity platform, new idea, let's say, build a strong book to take or not. You don't have to bother about it. You will UPI app, you are applying a problem, and there is a person in between who sort of, because of public utility and infrastructure is a more coordination, public infrastructure. It's a non-digital infrastructure. The difference between digital infrastructure and digital public infrastructure is exactly this. Where even the second regulator or the second set of entity, we consider all the public utility look at it as a loss of order. So the expanding use cases in these places which become only a digital infrastructure, only a private entity, to have more things. So you scale it beyond where the logical scale can be. And similarly, I would now put up to the features and the requirement for innovations. Well, the fact that the infrastructure is really to allow innovations is something that's core principle of it. So, like you heard Siddharth talk about that UPI allows you to transfer and parties. Now, that kind of abstract contribution can be brought in the infrastructure because they don't know how to do it. Like another infrastructure we talking about India is this is store. Do you know how to do it?
Are you referring to the DigiLocker?
DigiLocker, I don't know why I'm calling it. I come from another country. So DigiLocker is such a phenomenal use case that when you are anticipating your document within the DigiLocker, there's some company interested in that. Trusted environment gets created through DPI, which otherwise the family management would have required minimum amount or minimum amount. So whether it is sales, whether it is innovation, whether it is sign of trust that we want to be the DPI tracks for founders or for young companies or for the distributors and the trust that platform today.
Thanks, Vijay, for saying that. As an educator, I can tell you, we want to use DPI for authentication of education documents, and we want that to be universally acceptable across. Where we are struggling is that not everybody is following the same sort of credentials and protocols. And if startups can actually work on also nudging education systems to do that, I think every individual should have a digital identity where all of this is authenticated.
Yes, sir, I like one more thing to it, which is because we are talking in the context of West Asia and UAE. Now, my documentation is kept in DigiLocker and authenticatable. My bank account linked UPI is payment. Now, if we are able to implement our neighboring nations and high trust countries to it, then this becomes even further seamless, and those countries like UAE, I already know, is inspired by and extending the DPI capabilities. Then the world becomes even opportunity of a even larger set of people working together in a single protocol. So, like you talked about, let's say my high school degree or my graduation degree or my certificate of education or certificate of visa passport application could be utilized together. So, if I have certificated my document in DigiLocker, then application of my entry to UAE could be very easily convertible in the portal. If my bank account is linked to UPI, which then unemployment is there and I need to be paid, so DPI is a opportunity between just a company and these will provide an offer to government and municipal services like a DPI.
Fantastic. Great. So, we are all talking about this whole idea of interoperability, it becoming global, it becoming interconnected. So, Dilip, I have a tough question for you. When does, as we especially, in this hall, we do have senior officials from the UAE administration, some Indian administration officers. When we talk about UPI, DPI becoming global, going to UAE, going to Singapore, where does it stop becoming a technology problem and becomes a diplomatic problem, right? So what is it that we can do through conferences, through dialogues like these, to say at a diplomatic level, we need to break barriers and move forward much faster? Are there any ideas, any thoughts around that?
See, I think always a great question, and the way I look at it is, and maybe the question, the potential question here is, why do we need bilaterals, right? How the multilaterals exist, right? I think that's a very, very logical question. There has been established practices, established well-oiled mechanism to do the cross-border. What is the need to create a bilateral? And again, I would strongly suggest that this is the way as countries start becoming from the emerging to develop to developing. Right? And it's a question that country needs to decide. Right? For example, I would like to provide using the government and the regular RBI. It's this particular point I want to speak about. It's under their purview. It will take again to try to articulate my my understanding from their perspective. From an India perspective, I think that all the government of India and right from the Prime Minister and the RBI has been taken that while India is separation of the payments domestically, we do not have the pipe or bilateral connection with everybody in the world. But at least the top 20, top 30 countries that are really of an interest to us, right? That interest would be the trade, the interest would be the diaspora, interest would be the travel, right? Either the district we will put in an effort and try to get the bilateral so that tomorrow if there is any unforeseen situation as far as the geopolitics and those things are concerned, at least the India and the bilateral trade with that country is isolated from the sake of the potential issue. And I must say that we have been working with some CBUs so closely, right? In fact, the tie-up with the strong ties between India and UAE, right from the Prime Minister to the central banks, to the government, to the central banks. I think we work like a single country, and so I can say that. I think when actually, at least from an NPCI perspective, when we are working for UAE projects, I don't have feeling other than I'm working for India itself, right? And we are the Indian population so strong there, and I think the India and UAE share a very, very strong cultural tie-up and political and the regulatory relationships. I think, and again, I'm coming to the point that it's a decision between India and UAE, right? It's a very, very custom decision between India and UAE. Tomorrow, the same custom decision can be UAE as another country or India as another country. It's a choice, right? Whether to remain multilateral or whether to go bilateral, right? And it's a choice, and decision must be consciously exercised by the leadership of the country. Is the concept that me. Otherwise, I'm just saying that multilateral rules are there, they continue to exist, they continue to operate, right? Whether we continue to be devoted for the domestic or the cross-border transactions on that, or we create our own destiny with the bilateral, the friendship, the trade relationship is the decision for the two countries.
Fantastic. Do you agree that a bank would have enough confidence to work across borders?
Let me share some of the examples since you said bank. For over 40 years I spent as a banker in the region. I've seen so much in the last few years after UPI stepped in, the public infrastructure has integrated the market. This is the future. The future of the world is integration. From a geopolitical fragmentation, if we have to unify it, bringing prosperity to this planet, the only solution is trust. Trust is peace, peace is trust, and human dignity is ultimate. If that is the case, you have to globalize. In terms of global governance, you have to bring the promulgations to ensure human empowerment. It means, from a bilateral angle, you have to go to multilateral. It is polarized already. So interconnect the systems, trust each other. Why UAE is working so beautifully? Because the chemistry, as the gentleman has mentioned, after SEPA, the trade has crossed over 100 billions of dollars of cross-border investments. Banking is fueling like fire. Of late, they have invested in Indian banks. So much trust has traded in terms of partnership and digital advantage. I have seen nurses from Kerala. Their skills are not, education side still not recognized. I have seen a welder who gets his digital payments online, real time, is happy. I'm from Tanjore, from Tamil Nadu. I introduced an artisan, Tanjore Art Goods, and he's a global seller today. He said, sir, you opened a global market for me. And that's a great feel. So, irrespective of the size, you have a bigger opportunity to integrate the market. The future is integration, not disintegration. In a world where we are deeply connected, we are deeply fragmented in terms of because of the distrust. And now, this is a chance. Globalize it, standardize it, bring in enough regulations, not through isolation through crypto or tokens. You have to have a digital currency, currency is a barometer again, and reflecting it contrary to the trend now, simply because crypto is a dangerous parameter we are setting for parallel money. It's a money laundering tool, and we are also leaning towards personalization without having economic barometer to put it into substance. So digital public infrastructure is a major tool for you to trust the systems and empower the individuals so that the world become more peaceful. That, as our Prime Minister says, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is in the hands of digital public infrastructure. Individual dignity is institutional dignity, country's dignity, continental dignity, planet as a whole. That's what we need to focus. Our focus is on DPI with absolute ethical governance. The solution is always there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we have a few minutes. I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience as well. So if there are any questions, please ask for the mic. We'll be happy to take. But as the audience warms up, Siddharth, I have one last question to you. Trust is one word which everybody's talked about, right? As a designer, as somebody who's really putting together a lot of these projects and infrastructure together, how do you build trust into design? What are the kind of elements that you bring about? And I'll request if the mic can be passed around to anybody who has a question from the audience.
Yeah, that's definitely an important question, and trust has different nuances. So I'll take a shot at it. One is trust at the level of the technology itself, right? So designing these protocols, how they're cryptographically trusted, what does it mean from a security perspective, what does it mean from a data privacy perspective. So you have trust at the level of the underlying tech. Does it mean someone can turn it off? Who can turn it off? How decentralized is it? How do I enforce controls depending on what type of asset? So there are, of course, a whole body of work, but really one level of trust is trust at the level of technology. And obviously, as technology becomes more reliable, people start to trust it more. Think of it like operating systems on your smartphone. And there's often been this interesting paradigm I've asked myself, which is, if you think about it, on one end of financial infrastructure, we regulate the entire stack. But on the other end, if you go ahead and build apps on a smartphone, central banks don't regulate the operating system, right? And so I think there's some nuances there, but there's a lot to be looked at trust at the level of technology. Then you have trust at the level of the legal frameworks. I think what Vijay mentioned, which is also, you may have technology like DigiLocker or wallets, but who accepts it? And how do you have population scale acceptance of it? And so that's where you need legislative frameworks coming in to say that these particular technologies, these particular electronic formats, you see this in cross-border trade. It's not a technical problem why people are exchanging physical documents. It's actually a legal problem because in many countries, e-versions of bills of lading are not accepted. And so I think there's a technical dimension to it. There's a legal dimension to it. But more importantly, it's actually how do you create trust in people to use the system, right? And so why would individuals, why would businesses trust it? And that comes down to actual operations. How do you manage fraud? How do you address their concerns? How do you cater to their diverse needs? So I think trust is actually very multifaceted. There's no one answer depending on which lens or where you're sitting.
Thank you, Siddharth. I think you've explained that very well. Thank you. There's a question, lady at the back, please. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, please.
This is coming from Japan and China. We're honored to be invited to this forum and quite agree with the independence of the human system. What I wanted to ask is, along with the Indians' independence payment system, and how would you consider to work with, for example, the Greeks' digital currency as a block, and how would you work, for example, China's SIPS RMB system? By the way, I'm asking this from a very good intention because I'm also the advisor of the Research Center, Global South Geoeconomics Research Center. I want to see more cooperations.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. Great question. So who wants to take this on? Siddharth, Vijay. How do we see integration happening with China? How do we see integration happening in different parts of the world? If I can paraphrase that question a little bit, there is, again, the question back on trust, right? So there are certain areas or countries where there is a bilateral, more ease of cooperation, and there are certain areas where there may be more mistrust which needs to be worked upon. So is there a thought around that? Vijay, please go ahead.
Global financial system integration process where when you trust the financial system, connecting to the financial system is called a template because one sovereign trusts the other sovereign, and that is the kind of model that we're talking about. That if you trust anyone with your passport, you will issue a verified passport. That if you just issue bank account that it is KYC and everything is corrected, then these are just the rates. So the principle still remains and stays the same. It is the new method of connecting with people. If I'm physically handing over the passport and you're checking and verifying, well, the dealer will verify. Similarly, if you're trusting verifying the bank account and currency, then you're verifying the new methods, nodes.
All right. Anyone else? Siddharth? Yeah, please.
Yeah.
I think the country trusts each other, right? The rest is technology. I think it's not very difficult to sort this out, as Siddharth said before. It's cryptographic, it's signatures, or whatever. And also, it's not only the trust on transaction costing, but also on what we call the credentials and also the settlement guarantee and a variety of other things to protect the bilateral trade against. But I think let's just start somewhere from top. And that has been my experience working for NPCI. Because once the top is aligned, I think getting the technology and the things sorted out is not difficult. I think the policy and the top leadership will come to regulators must be aligned first with each other, and then it's very easy for technology folks like us to sort it out.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, if I can add to other contenders. See, in substance, we need to build a partnership, trust. How do you do it? Essentially, you democratize the whole framework. Don't challenge the sovereignty. Don't challenge this territorial integrity. Currency will follow. Today's context, everyone is administering currency. India has got capital control. We don't administer the currency at present. We are not convertible. Americans have printed money. They weaken the currency. Now de-dollarization is taking place for trade or investments. We are also seeing now with the digital currency, consensus as a central bank digital currency still not evolved. That's the only solution. You have to have one country, one currency. You don't have anything else. Currency is not done by printing money, is not at your discretion. It's an economic barometer. You bring in peace only by unifying the parameters. That's where ethics comes in. This is what I'm again and again I'm saying. It's not technology. It is ethics. It is human emotions. Unless you have character building, you cannot have character building in global governance. You cannot even control artificial intelligence. You will kill yourself. Today, the empowerment is not given to the same engine to moderate. They will eat the humanity. That's the danger we have. Today, answer is not an issue. Who asks the right question is an issue in terms of economic engine or technology convergence. So we have a major danger now. Major danger. We have to understand this. Today, it is not symmetric in terms of security. We talk about public digital infrastructure. It's a national security. Without firing a single missile, you can destroy an economy through artificial intelligence. You know it. If that is the case, what we need? We need moral and ethical governance. How do we bring characterization to individual nations? How do you bring it? Only by ensuring there is an absolute ethical governance. That's where the framework should be. Today, a gentleman was talking about security. Your data is, you're only a content provider. You don't have, who owns the data? Is it the market? Is it the government? Is it the individual? Nobody. You can only provide content. It is not yours. It is sitting in somewhere in Silicon Valley maybe. So if I can't control my destiny, if my data is not in my control, my privacy is not there. Whether I want personalization or privacy, I have to think first. If I want privacy, then I have to maintain my sovereignty as an individual As a country, I have to maintain my own database. Full stop. So ethically democratize it, open it up. We don't need big techs to come and give you, solutions to it. Individual nations have to evolve their own intelligence to have complete control on their destiny. Nobody else. Otherwise, there will always be conflict. There will always be Cold War. There will always be fragmented markets. There will always be geopolitical risk. Let's understand this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Siddharth, you want to wrap it up for us?
I wanted to add on, while I'm not qualified to comment on the geopolitics of it, and there are many more of you in the room and on this panel, but a dimension I wanted to bring up is today the internet largely is designed around organizations and people interacting with each other. But one thing that will really shape it going forward is agents and AI agents coming in. And that's something we've been looking at a lot from a tokenization perspective between financial assets on one end. But really, a lot of these decisions going forward will be driven by networks of millions and billions of AI agents. And so I think there a lot of the decision factors will also start to play out in terms of who do you contract with, who do you not engage with, and so on.
Fantastic. Great. I think that's all what we have time for. And I think it's been a great conversation. The future of creating infrastructure, digital public infrastructure, is not going to be siloed with just countries. It's going to be with cooperation. It's going to work with different elements of sovereignty, of trust, of interoperability, and of course, a lot of innovation coming from different parts of the world. India and UAE have a great opportunity of working together on this, and let's hope we see some great ideas and solutions that the next generation of users of this digital public infrastructure are going to experience and enjoy. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Vijay. Thank you, Dilip, for joining us online. Thanks a lot. Thanks.